Well, I have Patrick here with me this morning. Patrick's the husband of Lisa, uh, survivor of satanic ritual abuse, SRA. We've heard her story for the last couple days, live streaming and interviewing Lisa. It's a privilege to hear the other side of the journey, one that we've not heard before, and that would be from her husband. Patrick, welcome.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Patrick, you're a teacher, a college professor, and you've been married to Lisa for how many years?
29 years.
Good. You met Lisa in college, is that correct?
Yes.
Tell me what it was like back then.
Okay.
What Lisa was like.
We met at the University of Michigan, and we were in a college Christian group, now called Chi Alpha. I think they called it, well, they had different names for it back then. And I was a second-year graduate student in economics, and Lisa was a freshman. That's when I met her at first. And I didn't really talk to her a lot right away, but eventually got to know her a little bit. And like most college freshmen, she had a lot of energy and a lot of bubbliness, beginning new phase of life sort of thing. I also found out that she was very passionate about children. She was going to major in elementary education. I found out that she loved family very much. It was extremely important to her. And not right away, but eventually we started becoming interested in each other and dating. And I also found out that she had an extraordinarily low self-esteem. Like most boyfriends, I would tell her she looked pretty, and she would hang her head like that. The best way to describe it, and I described it to her back then and later, she seemed like she saw herself as not almost, but not quite as low as a street person in her self-image or her viewpoint of herself. And so I noticed that. And also before we started dating, I heard that she was crying a lot. And, you know, at the time you gather it was homesickness. But I went through some of that too, even as a grad student. I'd already been through undergrad. I went through some of that, but usually people don't cry a lot about it. So that seemed out of kilter too, so to speak. So I did notice initially some problems like that, even though she had the energy of a freshman, like almost all freshmen have when they're starting out in college. And she was excited. She loved God very much, very passionate about the things we were doing in our college Christian group, Chi Alpha.
Great. You married then and had a family. Lisa began to show symptoms and signs of the SRA. What was that like? And when did you start seeing those type signs?
Okay, well, I'm going to go through a few steps of that. I think seeing how low her self-esteem was back when I'd give her a compliment when we were dating was the beginning of some of that. There were times where she would say some good things about our family. She'd say some negative things about her dad and how he treated her. Nothing about sexual abuse at that point in time, although I will come back to something that is related to that in a second. She would say some negative things, and then just in conversation at another point in time, I would bring that up for whatever reason. There was a good reason I would bring it up. And she'd say, oh no, that's not the way it is. My dad loves me. And it's kind of a head scratcher, you know? Like, well, you said this negative thing. Now it's not so negative. It's not consistent, right? So I noticed little things like that. So I'm going to walk through as far as how much I noticed when. Yeah. I noticed, let's see. Yeah, she told me that once when we were dating, that her dad had showered with her when she was little, like maybe 4 years old. Red flags went off inside of me all over the place. When somebody says something to you, sometimes you imagine what they just told you. I did not imagine body parts, but you could see a vague image of a dad and a 4-year-old in a shower naked. I didn't didn't visualize body parts, but the general picture, mental picture was there. And it was just like, no, 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 you just don't do that. That's ridiculous. So red flags went up. And of course, I tucked that away. I didn't at that time conclude, oh, definitely he's done something, but it was like, oh, okay, well, that could be a serious problem, obviously. So I thought of that and tucked that away, of course, and was mindful of that through the years before she started remembering explicitly what happened to her. So her first memory was not of satanic ritual abuse, SRA, it was of sexual abuse in the home. And we were going to bed. Our oldest was about 5 years old at the time, and she, on one of the earlier videos, she said the way that her dad made a little tent for them to play in and kept the sun out, and some other things he did was just kind of, something's not right, is what she told me. She said, Patrick, he's buddying up to her. It's just not right, he's buddying up to her. And I said, well, what do you think he might do? What's going on? She said, I don't know, it's just not right. It was shortly after that, we were going to bed one night. We weren't yet asleep, maybe getting a little close to it, so she was not dreaming. I won't go into the graphic detail, but she started freaking out. Not exactly a scream, because it wasn't that loud, but that sort of terror type sound. And she told me of feeling something on her face, a male body part. And it was just so real, no panic. So how did I notice it? It's like one of those things, it's like, okay, wow, here we go, this is bad. And so, that was an obvious one to notice. She eventually started recovering memories of what happened to her. Eventually realized it was her dad, and talk about later things that confirm that, many things that confirm that very clearly. But I noticed something, talked about, symptoms. One of the symptoms is repression of memories. People seem to have a problem with that. But around that time, right around that time, I saw her do it. We got married in 91. We're talking about 1999 right now. When she first started recovering memories of what her dad did to her, the sexual abuse in the home. One of her bridesmaids, who was in our college ministry group that I talked about earlier, was her bridesmaid. And relatively shortly into our marriage, this would have been maybe 1 year after we got married. We got married in 91, so maybe around 92, give or take. We got a letter from her, well, Lisa got a letter from her bridesmaid telling some of her close friends that she had been sexually abused. I forget if it was by a father or a stepfather at this point in time. But she talked about how her family, didn't want to believe it, and how hard it was for her. So that's maybe around 92. So in 99, when Lisa started remembering this, I remembered that. And I said, Lisa, remember Pam, your bridesmaid, wrote you a letter, something similar happened to her, and she hadn't remembered it and things like that. Lisa did not remember the content of that letter at all. All she remembered was that Pam had written her a letter. That's it.
Yeah.
No content. Now, if one of my groomsmen, who's a friend of mine, sent me a letter and said I'd been sexually abused by a parent, and all these bad, I would remember it. I saw her repress it. Saw it in action. And so that's a sign. Now, the satanic ritual abuse, we've seen things like panic attacks. All right, so somebody says something, does something, she interprets a certain way, right or wrong, crawls into a shell, starts crying, whimpering, saying, oh, sometimes you could tell she was thinking something was going on that necessarily wasn't going on, but it was triggering things. I saw her once hold her childhood Raggedy Ann doll close to her chest and then dropped it. And Lisa, what's going on? I don't know, but the story she could tell.
So some of the memories that you're saying the memories are now starting to come.
Yes.
You could then, how did you know those were truth? Other than what I'm hearing you say right now, that I mean, just by all of that,
Yes.
says, oh yeah, a lot of this has got to be truth. All of it's got to be truth from that point.
Yes.
And it's just,
Well, that's a very good question, and you had mentioned that I'm a college professor, and I want to give a little background on that, about how I process things. And I think it's important in general. In academics, the right way to look at things intellectually is to look at each individual thing, but also look at the whole set of information. And I'm going to probably talk about that a lot because I've noticed a lot of people don't do that. Part of my job is evaluating people's reasoning, my students. And a major part of my job is education. And when you've been doing it a long time, you notice when people aren't using good intellectual practice. And so you have to look at the individual things and you have to look at the whole set of things. And so as that preface, let me talk about, I'm going to address your question, I'm going to talk about a number of things. All right. First of all, the thing about her dad saying he showered with her when she was 4. I remember that. Okay, that's way out of, that's ridiculous. You just don't do that. I'll probably skip around a little bit. The first time she confronted her parents about that, we went and knocked on their door. They were stonewalling. Lisa hadn't even said exactly what the problem was with her dad, but they knew that's why they were stonewalling. We talked to them. Lisa brought up the showering. He said, oh, that was only, he admitted this. This is something Lisa had never forgotten. He said, oh, that was only a few times when we were in a hurry. Eric, or your youngest brother, was not old enough really to shower. When we were in a hurry, I'd run him through, then I'd run you through. Lisa is 7.5 years older than her youngest brother, or her younger brother. So if he's 1 even, you don't run a baby through a shower. So even if he's 1 or 2, that makes her 8.5, 9.5, 10 years old. By his own admission. Through the years, he told me other things, probably in his mind innocent, but were telltale signs. He told Lisa and me of friends of theirs that their daughter or niece or something had accused them of sexual abuse, and of course that's not true. This girl's always been a liar, etc. So he said to me, after some other people left the room, he said, I got a hold of Lisa's medical records in case anybody ever said anything like that about me. This is before Lisa told me or had any specific memories of sexual abuse. This is before 1999, shortly before that he said that. Oh, I tucked that away because in my mind is, why would you think anybody would say anything like that about you? I'm thinking, I'm not going to do that because my kids aren't going to say that about me because I didn't do that. Yeah. Right? Some of you might remember back in that era, in the mid-late 90s, that one of the Kennedys, William Kennedy Smith, had been accused of date rape, I believe it was. And there was a trial and a hearing about it. And Lisa's dad at one point said, well, the way she was dressed, she was asking for it. I'm thinking, I didn't say that one out loud, but I thought, that sounds like somebody a viewpoint of somebody who would do something like that. I saw her dad hurt a child, his nephew once. So let me explain that. This would have been shortly after we were married. I'm going to guess 93, 94. I'm not sure exactly. And we were at a family function on her side of the family at her dad's sister's, her aunt, and her husband's house. And just not too many feet away from their house, there was a basketball court. It wasn't theirs, but it's just in the neighborhood. And they were playing basketball, and one of Lisa's aunt and uncle's sons, Lisa's cousin, was guarding Lisa's dad. But he was only maybe 10 years old. And like a lot of 10-year-olds would do against an adult playing basketball, you can't defend him, you're not big enough. So he tried to even the odds by fouling him a lot. And of course it was irritating Lisa's dad, and that's understandable. If you're playing basketball and somebody's fouling you, kids fouling you all over the place, it'd be kind of irritating, right? But at the beginning of one play, he takes the basketball, his half court, so you start the play with just holding the ball and passing it to somebody. He had the ball in one hand, took his other hand, put it on the kid, the 10-year-old's head, his nephew, and threw the kid to the ground. Kid lands on his shoulder pretty hard. I don't think it didn't separate his shoulder, but pretty hard. Kid cried, went off into his house, which not too far away, remember, and came out with his dad, Lisa's uncle. And I'm guessing that the dad coached the kid sort of what to say, because the kid came out, the game stopped. He said to his uncle, he said, "I don't appreciate what you did to me." Lisa's dad looked at him and said, "It's a man's game, you got to be a man to play it." So I processed that, okay? He hurt a child, was confronted by it, and showed absolutely no remorse for it. So I tucked that away. All right? And then, relatively soon after Lisa had memories of sexual abuse in the home, she talked about having memories of satanic ritual abuse, SRA. And then I remembered some other things he said to me through the years. He said before we started going to church, we were experimenting with different things. We even got together, a friend of mine with, I guess, I don't know if he used the word, but what would have been a medium. Some people call it a witch. He didn't use that word, and we went to, I forget where it was, maybe his friend's office or something, and tried to levitate a table because we were searching, for. And I said, "Well, did the table levitate?" He said, "Well, it moved a little." And so I knew he had been involved in witchcraft.
Yeah.
And Lisa started looking into things too. She called her pastor back from that era because his family did start going to a church. And he knew that Lisa's dad had been involved in those sorts, or in spiritualist camp type groups, and even had the name of one of the women that was involved. And we did some research on this person, talked to her a few years later, talked to her then husband. They had subsequently divorced, and I'll tell you that story.
Yeah.
Because like I said, we have a whole set of things. Lisa was wanting to make sure that these memories weren't just something crazy. She said, "I'm going to look into it." We went to this person, found his name, found his address, went to their back door. Their front door didn't seem like it was, well, their driveway went to their back door. Knocked on the door, his then wife or live-in, I'm not sure, answered the door. We said we wanted to talk to this person. We used his name, and because of some things that she had happened in her past, and this lady said, "Sure, come on in." So we went into their kitchen. That was their back room. by this door and called this ex-husband of this person that had been involved in spiritualist witchcraft type things that Lisa's parents had been involved in and admittedly been involved in. And he comes in to the kitchen, and Lisa said her name with her current last name, Meister, but then she gave her maiden name. And this fellow immediately looks at me with terror, like he thought I was going to pounce on him and beat him to a pulp.
Yeah.
I don't see that look very often, but boy, you know it when you see that look. I wasn't going to pound him and beat the crud out of him, but he looked at me like he was afraid I was going to.
Yeah.
Lisa said her dad's name. He repeated the name, but he prefaced it by saying, I don't know any so-and-so. His wife, or live-in at the time, I don't remember, said, oh, you know him. You know his business that he used to have in town? She gave the name of the business. He said, well, I don't know any, and repeated the name of the business. She said, yes, you do. You have one of his business bookmarks in the book you're reading right now. She went around into their little family room, came back, plopped it on the table, and there was one of his bookmarks for his business that he had at the time with his name, because his name was part of the name of the business.
Yeah.
And he said, still, and said, I don't know any such and such business. She said, you know where it is. It's where the subway is right now. I don't know any subway. In their town, there's one main drag in town of businesses. He lived 2 or 3 minutes, and he didn't know where the subway was?
Yeah.
So I don't know this person. I don't know his business. Oh, yeah, you do. You have his. He looks at me in terror when she identifies her name with her maiden name. And then we asked him about his ex-wife. Well, I wouldn't call her a witch. She was into observing people. His current wife who let us in or live in, I don't know what the situation was, said, yeah, she just used to watch people, and yeah, it was kind of creepy. So, and Lisa had talked about going to an investigator. The police did look into it. Apparently, if a family moves out of the state, the statute of limitations in Michigan froze, so he was allowed to look into it.
Yeah.
And he's talked about various things he found that corroborated her story, or what happened to her.
Yeah.
And so there's so many things. I think at this point, that might be all I go over, but here's what I want to say as far as how I process all these things and how I think probably everybody should process these things. A person could look at each one of those individual things and maybe explain it away. If I just looked at it in isolation, that wouldn't prove it. Right. Or that wouldn't move it beyond reasonable doubt in my mind. And I've noticed a lot of people doing this. Maybe people have always done this. Maybe people are doing it more in this era than ever before, and maybe it's a disease of the age, so to speak, or maybe people have always done this. I'm not sure, but I'm noticing it more and more. That people sometimes want to look at each individual thing, and if they can even sort of explain it away, they'll look at each one individually, and if they've successfully explained each one individually away, then they write it off. That's not how to go about reasoning things. You look at each individual thing.
Yeah, because you pretty much answered my next question with that about lying, because you put all this together.
Yes.
And it proves that she's not lying about it.
There's no way. And with, let me go to the SRA Memories. I won't go into any details right now, but when she started to remember some of them and tell me, actually she was writing them in a journal because she had trouble speaking them. She told me a little bit, or I read a little bit. I tried to gear up and get ready for the next thing because that's hard to deal with.
Yep. Yep.
And so I tried in my imagination, and I thought I had a decent imagination. I tried to imagine the worst thing I could think of that they might do so I'd be ready for the next one I might read in her journal. I read the next one in her journal thinking I'd prepared myself. They went way lower than the worst thing I could think of. What they did was way below, massively. If you're thinking about the ocean, you think you know how low the ocean can go, and then you find out it can go a whole lot lower.
Yeah.
Even more than that.
Yeah.
It
So
was
the thoughts you were having weren't anywhere near how bad it really was happened to her.
Not even close.
Yeah.
Now, I knew Lisa did not like horror movies. I knew she had no exposure to that as far as horror movies or novels that she read.
Yeah.
There's no way. And I couldn't even come up with that. And I thought I had, was thinking, well, my imagination's not too bad. There's no way you could make it up.
Yeah.
And then put it with everything else, and there are a whole lot of other things I still haven't mentioned.
Yeah.
Look at the whole set of things, there's no way.
Yeah.
You could be making that up or lying or deceived. No way.
And so because of that and all the thoughts you had, realizing that things were worse than you even imagined, what was it like? I mean, did you talk to your family at all about it? I mean, what were your thoughts about, here you are married, you've got how many kids by this time?
There'd be 3 by that time.
3 by that time. And I know your idea of it was the same as ours. There is no such thing as divorce. We're not divorcing.
Right.
We're going to make it through this no matter what it takes. That to me is, so were you able to go to your family for help?
Yes, I did. I talked to my mom, and she was was a strong Christian lady. She has since passed on, and she was very helpful. She was very open. She didn't just write it off.
Good.
She did help us look for the counseling center that Lisa mentioned in the earlier broadcast and video.
Minute Meyer.
Yes.
Clinic. Yes.
She helped us find that. And when she first started remembering sexual abuse in the home, she either had or found a pamphlet of somebody that had been through something similar. It may have been somewhere around that time.
Yeah.
Helped her find some literature, helped her find a book about recovered memories. And it is a very well-written book. I read it myself. And so she was very helpful. My dad was supportive. He didn't go and find all the books and things like that, but he was supportive and said, yeah, it's terrible how he was compassionate.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I was able to go to family, and they were supportive, and they listened, and they were all about helping.
Yeah.
And my mom was always one to go to the nth degree to help her family if they were in trouble.
Right. Okay.
And so she did that.
That's great.
And that's an influence on me. I'll probably talk more about that in a minute.
Yeah. So most husbands can't deal with the kind of abuse that you're talking. And one of the things that I know for husband's sake is you have to learn to let your wives talk. You got to let that out. Let them talk to you. If you never listen, how are they ever going to heal?
Yes.
If they can't talk to somebody.
Right.
So here you are, their husband, knowing all this is in the background. What kind of, you're hearing all this stuff about abuse. What made it different for you? I mean, what helped you to be able to go through this?
Okay. It's multifaceted on that. And the first thing, it's lately a phrase that's been reverberating in my thinking is you never leave your post. It's kind of a warrior analogy, soldier analogy. If they give you a post, you're on lookout or whatever. You never, ever leave your post. You hear things sometimes about people talking about what does a real man do? And I mean no disrespect to women. I can talk from a man's point of view. So what's a man? Part of it is you never leave your post. And part of being a Christian man especially is you never leave your post, and your wife and your relationship with her and your love and compassion for her is your post. Your faithfulness to her is your post. Your being willing to go down into the dirt and help her is your post. Listening to her is your post. Compassion is your post. Psalm 86:15 says he's a God full of compassion. I want to be like him.
Yes.
So being compassionate, listening, staying faithful, working hard to help, helping her find other people to help her is your post. And you don't ever leave your post. My mom always being willing to go down into the dirt and help people if they're in terrible trouble, especially family, was a very good influence on me. And then, he's a God full of compassion. I want to be like that. Part of compassion is putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Part of compassion is imagining what it was with them going through it.
Oh, yeah.
Imagination's a good thing. If I'm reading the Bible, if you're reading the Bible, it's important to imagine what's going on. Put yourself in the book as if you're there watching it. My mom used to say you can go anywhere in a book. I've heard other people say that. 2, put yourself there. So I did imagine what it was like watching Lisa as a little girl going through those horrible things.
Yeah.
And boy, that'll stir up compassion in you.
Oh, yeah.
There were times when I was by myself, I would cry very loud. This one's kind of hard. You never leave your post. You protect your family. You protect your wife. And the next thing I'm going to say is irrational. But there were times I was really mad at myself for not stopping it. And of course, I couldn't have. I didn't know her. I hadn't met her yet. But I was angry at myself. And I'm not saying that makes sense. I'm not trying to say that's good or bad.
Yeah.
Just those were my feelings.
Right.
I was mad at myself that I didn't stop it, because that's what you do.
Right. Absolutely.
And so all of those things, you said, what made me able to stand with her rather than ignore or emotionally leave or physically leave or go do other things or go after other people or groups or whatever, all those things.
Yeah.
But at its core, I want to be like God, because being like me, when I got saved young, but I saw some things in myself as a kid that I didn't like, and I knew some of them probably would just get worse. I came to God. I accepted Christ as my Savior because I needed things fixed on my inside. I knew some of them I wasn't going to be able to fix.
Right.
So leaning on God to try to be like him, because I didn't want to be like the old me with the temper tantrums I threw as a kid that I couldn't seem to control, that was going to get worse if I didn't get help, if I didn't get fixed by the Lord Jesus Christ and my Father in heaven. Leaning on him to do things his way and dig down in the dirt and help people who need it, be compassionate, and don't ever leave my post.
Yeah.
Is what, so God ultimately, but all those things in connection is what helped me not leave my post, what helped me try to do the best I could to be of help.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you talk about temper, and I know I've had my share of temper tantrums and stuff too. And the next question goes right along with that. It says,
Okay.
now that you found all this stuff, you're finding this stuff out, what was your relationship with Lisa's dad at that time? I mean, how did it change?
Well, right, that was kind of easy because he turned it into an adversarial one.
Yeah.
When we first went to confront him, Lisa went to confront him, he turned on me quite angrily.
Yeah.
And was pretty nasty, and so that was about it. So there was really, then of course, no relationship other than him being adversarial, and that was it. So we didn't really have any contact after that. Me and her dad
Right.
didn't have any contact after that point, or any communication after that meeting.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Has it gotten easier, the journey now?
In some ways, yes, but other ways, no. So easier, yes, to see Lisa's healing. She has come a long way. And of course, that makes it easier. It makes it, that part is joyful.
Yeah.
Go
How does it do as far as drawing you, you together to God? Through all this. You really got to rely on God in all this. You have to.
Of course, yeah.
It's just, you can't do it yourself. There's
That's
no
right.
way.
So of course, yeah, you lean on God harder, you lean on him together, and that God does use that as a positive.
Yeah.
But not everything's easier when somebody's been abused like that. Lisa talked about dissociated parts of her personality, and some of them react in irrational ways. In other words, somebody that's been through that, she mentioned it early in one of the earlier videos, there's times you may innocently step on a landmine and they might be really upset and triggered by something.
Yeah.
And when a person starts dealing with it, you will see it more often.
Right.
Because things are just more raw.
Oh, yeah.
And so, and it's probably true of everybody, I'm not picking on Lisa on this, people change over the years. And if somebody has more landmines that you accidentally step on and creates panic attacks, and maybe you get misinterpreted, not that I've never misinterpreted Lisa, it happens to everybody.
Oh, yes.
But, and not that everybody changes. I'm sure I've changed over the years, and I'm sure that's not always been easiest on her. But yes, people change over time, and certain things like that, like accidentally stepping on something and triggering her when you didn't mean to.
Right.
Sometimes that's gotten harder. In the earlier years of our marriage, we didn't necessarily go through as many of those because she hadn't even started to deal with it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So overall, easier.
Yeah.
But people change. I'm sure I've changed, and sometimes,
We all do.
if people don't, you didn't always used to be that way. Some things can be a little bit more difficult, especially if you accidentally upset somebody and you didn't mean that or whatever.
Yeah.
So mostly easier.
Yeah.
But some things have been a little harder.
Now, you talked a little bit about anger there, and did you ever want vindication for all this, or vengeance, or justice?
Okay, vindication, yes, for Lisa. I wanted people to see that, of course, she was telling the truth, and we talked about all the reasons I am
Right.
convinced beyond any doubt that
Right.
it happened. So vindication for Lisa, of course. Vengeance, no. The Bible says vengeance is mine, so I don't have anything to do with that. That's not my place.
Yeah. God's the judge.
Now, did I ever feel anger? Did I ever have a feeling of being mad? Did I ever have a feeling like if I had seen them do it, I would stop them by beating them up?
Yeah.
Well, that's past. That's not vengeance. That's back to that I wish I could have stopped it.
Right.
So a feeling of anger is not bad, but vengeance, no.
Right.
And what was the last one?
Justice.
Justice. Yes, of course I want justice, because that's how a free society works.
Well, and I think that's how you stop what's going on now,
Yes.
right now, with all the kids being kidnapped and all the pedophilia, and we need to get justice to stop this so it ends
Yes.
somewhere.
Yes.
It doesn't just keep going.
And, yes, I agree 100%. And it says to people that have been abused, yes, you matter.
Yes. Yes.
So, of course, I want justice because it's the right thing to do. I saw one of my favorite old movies is The Talk of the Town with Cary Grant, Ronald Colman, and Jean Arthur. It's a really good movie. They talk about, I'm going to go into it a little bit.
Yep.
Ronald Colman plays a law professor who ends up being nominated for the Supreme Court. He goes away for the summer to a rental home to do his research and things like that. He ends up meeting Cary Grant, who's kind of a somewhat directionless fellow at the time, an adult,
Yeah.
but a thinker. And they get into these debates about the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law and justice and all sorts of things. And the law professor was too much, well, the law, you got to go by the letter of the law, otherwise you have chaos. Cary Grant's character was, well, you can't go just by the letter of the law, you got to go by the spirit of the law, otherwise you can use the letter of the law as a noose around people's neck and manipulate it to entrap people and frame, what if I get framed? Because he was framed for something in the movie.
Yeah.
All right, and he was a fugitive from justice. And the lawyer didn't know who he was at first. He didn't know he was talking to a fugitive from justice, but he was innocent. They both came to a realization that they need the wording of the law, the letter of the law is important, but the spirit of the law is important too. You need both. But anyway, at the end, Ronald Colman, who was going to be on the Supreme Court pretty soon, ended up giving a speech to people that were going to come and try to get their own vigilante revenge on this guy who they thought burned up the town factory, but he hadn't. And he got in the way, shot off a gun, and made a speech. And he said, you got to think about the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. And he also said, don't do things this way. Do things the right way, but yes, justice is important. The laws are what make you free men in a free country. You have to guard it in your heart for your neighbor as well as yourself. So, yes, we want justice on people that do horrendous things to people. Those laws are there to make us free people in a free country.
Right.
And so, yes, justice is important. I have heard sometimes people preaching from the pulpit, not in the church I go to now, that say forgiveness means you give up all right to any recourse. It is not true. If you have been abused or somebody you know has been abused, you do have a right to tell the police.
Right.
And you do have the right to tell them, and if they want, and if they decide to look into it and prosecute, that's okay.
Yep.
It is good,
Correct.
it is right. That's
Yes.
on this earth what makes us free people in a free country.
Correct. Did you ever think this is just too much for me? I can't handle this.
There were times, but not like seriously. So there have been a couple of occasions through the years where I did ask Lisa, can we not talk about that for a week or two or something like that? So from time to time, but not very often. Yeah. And so there were other times it seemed overwhelming, but all I can do is say, well, the Bible says, I wrote down a couple of verses, if I may.
Yep.
Isaiah 54, starting in verse 14. Wait, no, that's not the right one. I'm sorry, excuse me. Ephesians 5, starting in verse 25. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for it.
Right.
That he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of the water by the word, that he might present it to himself a glorious church, not having spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that it should be holy and without blemish. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loves his wife loves himself. For no man ever yet hates his own flesh, or hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, even as the Lord the church. I'm going to skip the next couple of verses, and it says, let every one of you in particular so love his wife, even as himself. So no, any serious thought of this is too much for me to deal with, I'm going to check out. No serious thought of that.
Good. If you were to talk, and like right to the cameras today, to talk to a husband or a family member of an SRA survivor, what would you say to them to help them deal with the victim or the survivor with compassion?
Yes. First of all, realize God is a God full of compassion. Psalm 86:15. Strive to be like God. His ways are better than our ways. Think about what it was like for that person to go through it. Visualize it if you can. Let that stir up compassion in you. Be ready to go down into the dirt and help them. Listen to them. Get them help. Help them find books, good books. Help them find other people to talk to that are good at what they do. Pray with them. Read the Bible with them. Encourage them. One thing that I've had to do, and I've chosen to do with Lisa, is to point out the success. She said, oh, this is never going to end. This keeps going back, and I keep going back. I keep having all these troubles. I'm not getting better. Yes, you are. Look how far you've come. When she first started remembering what happened to her, she was on the couch, incapacitated in essence, crying in despair, on the couch, period, unable to do anything beyond get up, eat and drink a little bit, go to bed. Look,
How far you've come.
Look, yes.
Oh, wow. Because
Yes.
for you guys to drive all the way up here
Yes.
and to sit down and talk about this and what has happened and try to do something to help other survivors. What a compassion in your lives.
Yes.
You've come a long way, Lisa.
Yes.
Long ways in all of this.
Yes. And then try to get it in perspective. So another thing, you see your wife struggling, you see her thinking, oh, it's never going to get better because there are more struggles she's dealing with. I like to use analogies. I talked a little bit about my background as a professor and how to think things through, not just each individual thing, but everything together, etc.
Yeah.
I also like sports analogies. I like to watch football. My favorite team is the Chiefs. They won the Super Bowl this year. I'd been watching them for 48 years. That was the first Super Bowl they ever got to and won in those 48 years of me following football. That was a big deal for me. They walked off the field victoriously. I was happy.
Yeah.
The people that abused Lisa, her dad, other people in SRA, were out to destroy her and to destroy her having any relationship with God and to destroy her to her very core.
Right.
She today serves the Lord with gladness. She walks off the field victoriously.
Yes.
She has won. They lost. She won. She walks off the victor. Now, do people that have won football games always feel elated? Yes, when they realize they've won. But what if they've been injured? I've read where football players have to sit in Epsom salts and hot tubs for the next 2 or 3 days and then work all week on getting the pain down enough and the flexibility back to play the next week. Sometimes they don't feel like victors when they're in agony the next day after being hit and creamed and their muscles stretched almost beyond what they can bear. So it's important when you see your wife making progress and you see that she's not beaten, tell her, you won, they lost. Correct. You can walk off the field like champions like the Kansas City Chiefs did this year. You may not always feel like it if you're injured. You won. And don't forget, of course, God always leads us in the triumph if we follow him. The end of Romans 8, we're more than conquerors. Follow God. Lean on him as a husband, helping your wife as your wife recovers, or if she's going through that. And know that God leads you in victory. And you encourage your wife. You tell them, look how far you've come. You win. God, and God's your coach.
Yeah, yeah. And if you're ever using this phrase, just get over it, you need to just get over it and shut up. Because that phrase should never be said, ever, in this situation.
I agree, and I've noticed that too in some churches, not the one we go to currently. Some people kind of say that, get over it, forgive and forget, read the Psalms and go on. You got to forgive, you got to get over your hurt, because hurt people hurt people. I mean, people that are hurt end up hurting people. That sort of thing, to say to people that have been through abuse and are working on recovering, it ignores so many biblical principles. It's scary.
Oh, yeah.
What happened to weeping with those who weep?
Right.
What happened to the fruit of the Spirit of gentleness and kindness? What happened to Psalm 86:15, where God's a God full of compassion?
Yeah.
So you've got to check everything against the Word. Is what I'm saying, is what I'm doing, are the things I'm doing, are the things I'm saying in harmony with biblical principle or not? Because don't forget, it's just an analogy, but if he's the coach, you do what the coach says. You want to walk off that field victoriously.
Yeah.
If he says, be compassionate, if he says, weep with those who are weeping, and I'm not doing those things, I'm going against what the coach says. Guess what happened if the Chiefs went against what the plan was or what the plays were?
They would never made it.
Right.
And we in the men's group have talked about the sword. The sword, you have you got a sword. You can defend your family, but when you say something as stupid as just get over it, you've just taken that sword and put it right through your wife.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
You're not defending her at that time.
No.
You're defeating her. And that can't be said.
Yeah.
It just cannot be.
And in essence, it's spitting on biblical principles.
Yeah. How important is that SRA Survivor is believed that they are able to talk about the trauma to their husbands and their families?
Oh, it's critical. And of course, I'm going to go back and preface it. We talked about all the things that Lisa and I process to make sure a recovered memory and things like that. You know, some people are questioning that.
Yeah.
And so, of course, we realized it was true, of course. And so it's vital that you believe her. It's vital that you talk to her, let her talk to other people. Because if you don't, they're going to feel isolated.
Correct.
And if they're isolated, the danger is they'll give up and never get better. We've heard of people that have had tragic endings of their lives, maybe been all alone, maybe went to drugs and alcohol, or self-destructive, or maybe killed themselves, self-destructive activity, ended up with a miserable life at every facet you can think of. That's what the danger would be of the person going that way if you don't believe them and don't talk to them and let them talk to other people and encourage them.
And that goes right along with the next question is, where does the church fit in the middle of this? Same thing. As the church just cannot ignore this anymore.
No.
We cannot, as a church, ignore when a person comes up to us and says some of this stuff's happening. That's just something. Don't worry about it. You'll get over it. No, we can't do that anymore.
Yeah. Forgive and forget. So don't talk about it. It'll just make it worse on you.
Yeah.
I think some ministers that I've heard say things like that may be referring to some people that maybe call the pastor every day with this problem and that problem and not really trying to get better. But then if they say that in general, somebody that is trying to get better and not calling the pastor every day with just this little problem, that little problem, they're really trying to get better. They hear, just don't talk about it, just forget about it, you'll just make things worse. It's the wrong message because, again, it ignores biblical principle of weeping with those who weep. God is called wonderful counselor, compassion. It ignores all of that. So the church has to also be aware that somebody that's been sexually abused, and especially ritually abused, must be treated with extreme gentleness. One of the fruits of the Spirit is gentleness. Please, no one forget gentleness. I hear a lot about some people saying good things about being an alpha male.
Yeah.
How about being an alpha and omega male?
Right.
Jesus
Correct.
said, I am the
Correct.
alpha and omega, so let's be like Jesus. There are times, especially if somebody's been that badly abused, you better be massively gentle with them.
Correct. How do you help them heal? Is there any wisdom you could share in the healing process?
Yes, encourage them. Study the word with them. Tell them you love them. Be as gentle as you can. Help them get help. Reassure them that you're the only one for me. Study the word yourself so that you keep your eyes on Jesus and you keep yourself thinking and acting like him. Be an alpha and omega male. Be like Jesus. And be willing to do whatever you can to help, because that's your job. That's your post. And don't leave it. Don't ever leave your post.
Thank you, Patrick, for being so open and honest with the men that are walking through the SRA with their wives, girlfriends, family members, whatever. It's not been an easy subject.
No,
It's not an easy subject to talk about.
No, it's not. But I would like to say also to my wife, Lisa, I love you with all my heart.
And in fact, this is the first time, I believe, that there's ever been an SRA from a husband's perspective.
That might be, I don't know.
That's ever been shared. It's also the first time that the church opened up in discussions like this. And it needs more of this. We need to help the church help people. Again, I thank you for coming all this way to share and helping others to know how to help satanic ritual abuse survivors begin to heal. And we do have the book, if you can get a hold of it on Amazon, Only God Rescued Me, from Lisa Meister.
Could I add one more thing about
Yes,
the title of that book?
absolutely.
Only God Rescued Me. So the title of the book, I don't know if they got into that on the earlier videos in detail or not. People would say, well, why didn't God send somebody in to pull you out? I said that to myself, even though I didn't know her. I wish I could have gotten in there and pulled her out of it. But what does she mean, only God rescued me? Nobody pulled her out of the midst of those things. Their ultimate design was to destroy her and her relationship with God. That was their design. They failed. God rescued her out of the prison of being separated from God, which is a far worse, as bad as satanic ritual abuse is, and it's beyond horrific.
Correct.
To be separated from God is worse. God rescued her from that, and that was their design. So again, for her to serve the Lord with gladness,
Yes.
God led her in the triumph. She is victorious.
Yes.
And I thank you, Nick, for talking to me. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.